Hello everyone, today we will be looking at Norin the Commander deck. Just like last week, this is a deck that a friend of mine made. I played it as well, and it plays actually quite fun. Now Norin the was a card, there is so much potential in this card, really, there is so much to do with this guy. He's only 1 mana, so that's a very, very cheap commander. It's a 2/1, but you don't actually use that. You never use the 2 or the 1. Because when a player plays a spell or a creature attacks, remove Norin the from the game. Return it to play under its owner's control at end of turn. This is so much fun. Every time something happens, he just, flees. He's striding through a hallway very carefully. And something happens and he's gone. Alright. So even if someone is like, ho, I'll stifle his ability, he's like, no, not stifle, go away. Even counters trigger this. So, Norin the is very hard to get rid of, except for cards like Pestilence, Pyrohemia, cards that are already in play that can deal damage through its effect. That's the only way to get rid of him. No other way as far as I know. Or like a Neverrail's Disc, of course, which destroys everything from a distance. So let's start off with this deck. Take a look at all the cards that affect Norin. Like, he comes back into play every single turn if someone does anything. So what cards can we possibly think of? Well, of course, this old battered Pandemonium. It's an enchantment for 4 mana. Whenever a creature comes into play, and he does that almost every turn, that creature's controller may choose to have it deal damage equal to its power to target creature or player. Now this is absolutely madness. Every time something happens, every time someone plays a creature, damage. Norin every time, damage. Crazy. Now then we have Perforos, the God of the Forge. 4 mana is indestructible. As long as your devotion to red is less than 5, Perforos isn't a god. Isn't a creature. But it's a god, of course. It's a 6/5 if it's a creature. And whenever another creature enters the battlefield, Perforos deals 2 damage to each opponent. Very nice. And for 3 creatures you control get +1/+0, but no one cares about that in this deck. We have Impact Tremors. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So that really ticks a lot. In the Web of War, whenever a creature comes into play under your control, it gets +2/+0 and gains haste until end of turn. Now, this isn't really something for Norin the but there are some other creatures that benefit from this. Outpost Siege. As it enters the battlefield, choose Khans or Dragons. If you choose Khans, at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library. Until end of turn, you may play that card, but you will never choose Khans. You will always choose Dragons in this deck. Because when it leaves the battlefield, and it happens when something is played, Outpost Siege deals 1 damage to target creature or player. Sweet. Of course we have a Genesis Chamber. Whenever a non-token creature comes into play, Norin. Every single time. That creature's controller puts a 1/1 mere artifact creature token into play. But it also counts for your opponents. We have a Warstorm Surge. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it deals damage equal to its power to target creature or player. We have an Ogre Battle Driver. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, that creature gets +2/+0 and gains haste until end of turn. It's actually the same as in the Web of War. Not really for Norin himself, but for other creatures. That's very nice and handy. All those tokens that we will see in the future. Confusion in the Ranks. Whenever an artifact, creature or enchantment comes into play, its controller chooses target permanent another player controls that shares a type with it, exchange control of those permanents. Now this can be very fun with Norin. And we have a Cloudstone Curio. Whenever a non-artifact permanent comes into play under your control, you may return another permanent you control that shares a permanent type with it to its owner's hand. This card was often used in infinite combo shenanigans, which we will not discuss because we don't play that way. Right, we have Panharmonicon to strengthen Norin. If an artifact or creature entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control, this whole pile here, to trigger that ability triggers an additional time. And we have a Conjurer's Closet. At the beginning of your end step, you may exile target creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under your control. Doesn't apply to Norin, but it applies to some other creatures we have. And let's just take a look at the creatures. We have some threats in here. We have Kozilek, the Butcher of Truth. 10 mana, 12/12. Whenever you cast it, draw 4 cards. It has Annihilator 4. So when it attacks, defending player sacrifices 4 permanents. And whenever it is put into graveyard from anywhere, shuffle your entire graveyard back into your library. Excellent. And we have a World Gorger Dragon. Flying, trample. When it comes into play, remove all other permanents you control from the game. Whenever he leaves the battlefield, return the removed cards to play under their owner's control. So you can do a lot of stuff with this as well, if you time it well. Yeah. Then we have another funny card. Arena of the Ancients. You don't see this in Commander. I wonder why. It's a very powerful card. When Arena of the Ancients comes into play, tap all legends. Legends do not untap during their controller's untaps phase. That's pretty powerful if you ask me. Right. Then we have some creature generators, some token generators, because we want to trigger all those enchantments we have. So we start off with a Siege Gang Commander, which creates, if it comes into play, 3 1/1 red goblin tokens, and if you pay 2, you have a sack outlet for goblins, and it deals 2 damage to creature or player. Very powerful, very good. We have a Snake Basket. For X, you can sacrifice it, put X Cobra tokens into play. These days they are errated as snake tokens. And treat them as 1/1 green creatures. You can only play it as a sorcery. Still, it triggers a lot of stuff. Firecat Blitz, X and 2 red, put X 1/1 red creature tokens into play with haste. Remove them from the game at the end of turn, and it has flashback for 2 red and sacrifice X mountains. Sweet. Then we have Tempt with Vengeance, X and red. It has a tempting offer. Put X 1/1 red elemental creature tokens with haste onto the battlefield. Each opponent may put X 1/1 red elemental creature tokens with haste onto the battlefield. For each player who does, put another X 1/1 red elemental creature tokens with haste onto the battlefield. So opponents can choose either, yeah, okay, we want to do this as well, or not. And see what you did there, because you can create so many with this. Such a large army. Right, we have a Pentavis, 7 mana, it comes into play with 5 +1/+1 counters on it. If you remove 1 +1/+1 counter from it, you can create a Pentavite token with flying onto the battlefield, which is a 1/1. Or you can sacrifice a Pentavite and assemble it again to put a +1/+1 counter on it. More tokens. We have a Mere Battlesphere, 4/7. When it enters the battlefield, put 4 1/1 colorless Mere tokens into the battlefield. Whenever Mere Battlesphere attacks, you may tap X untap Mere tokens. If you do, Mere Battlesphere get +X +0 until end of turn and deals X damage to defending player. Very nice if you have double the tokens. Then we have a Mere Incubator, 6 mana, just an artifact, does nothing on itself. But if you pay 6 and you sacrifice it, search your library for any number of artifact cards, remove them from the game, put that many 1/1 Mere artifact creature tokens onto play. That can trigger a lot of stuff. Alright, so we have Solemn Simulacrum as well. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card, put that card onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. When it dies, draw a card. Great with Panharmonicon, then it triggers twice. Also nice with Panharmonicon, Pia and Kiran Nalaar. When they enter the battlefield, put 2 1/1 colorless Thopter creature tokens with flying onto the battlefield. For 3, sacrifice an artifact, it deals 2 damage to target creature or player. Very cool. Now we have a sack outlet for all those tokens. Goblin Bombardment, sack a creature, deal 1 damage. Great card. Great card. Right, we also have this great guy, Kiki-Jiki, the Mirror Breaker. Who doesn't know him? It's a 2/2 haste legendary Goblin Shaman creature. And if you tap it, you can put a token of that's a copy of target non-legendary creature you control onto the battlefield. That token has haste. Sack it at the end of the next end step. Yeah, oh, you can do so many things with that. It's insane. Right, what else do we have? We have some stuff that happens when stuff leaves the battlefield. Vicious Shadows. When a creature is put into a graveyard from play, you may have Vicious Shadows deal damage to the target player equal to the number of cards in that player's hand. All those tokens. Sure, go ahead. Play a Damnation or a Wrath of God. I dare you. And we have a Mimic Vat. It's a 3-mana artifact with Imprint. Whenever a non-token creature is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you may exile that card. If you do, return each other card exiled with Mimic Vat to its owner's graveyard. So 3 mana, put a token onto the battlefield. That's actually a copy of the exiled card. Gains haste, but it's exiled at the end step. Next end step. We have some destruction to keep stuff from getting out of hand. We have Shattering Spree, 1 red. Replicate, 1 red. When you play this spell, copy it for each time you paid its replicate cost. You may choose new targets for its copies. Destroy target artifact. Pretty powerful. And we also have Vandal Blast in the same spirit. 1 red, destroy target artifact you don't control. Or Overload for 5, which replaces target artifact with each artifact you don't control. And of course, we have Karn Liberated. Great card. 7 mana, 6 loyalty. It has +4 ability to exile a card from his or her hand, or -3, exile target permanent. And if you manage to get the -14, you can restart the game, leaving in exile all non-aura permanent cards exiled with Karn Liberated. Then put those cards onto the battlefield under your control. Kinda sneaky. Alright, 2 Planeswalkers we haven't done yet. Chandra Ablaze starts at 5 loyalty, +1 ability, discard a card. If it's a red card, deals 4 damage. Or -2, each player discards their hands, then draws 3 cards. Or -7, cast any number of red instant or sorcery cards from your graveyard without paying their mana costs. I'd say number 2 is pretty good. Daretti the Scrap Savant, 4 mana, starts with 3 loyalty. His +2 is discard up to 2 cards, then draw that many cards. Or -2, sacrifice an artifact. If you do, return target artifact from your graveyard to your hand. It's a bit of a Goblin Welder, if you ask me. And -10, you get an emblem with whenever an artifact is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, return that card to the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step. Oh, fun fact. Daretti can also be your commander, if you wish it so. Right, we have some destruction. Some stuff to get rid of. To get rid of stuff. Oh my god. It's not really a destruction card, but we have Goblin Welder, which is effectively a destruction card, but it also gets something back. So you choose an artifact a player controls and target artifact card in that player's graveyard, and then you switch it. Yeah. Get rid of that nasty artifact for that crappy artifact. Right, we have Pyrohemia, 4 mana. It's basically a red pestilence. That's actually it, because they, in this set Planar Chaos, they color shifted some cards, and they used Pestilence to make it red and create Pyrohemia. At the end of turn, if no creatures are in play, sacrifice Pyrohemia. For 1 red, deal 1 damage to each creature and each player. Great card. But you can kill your own Norin, so be careful. We have an Oblivion Stone, 3 mana artifact. For 4, put a fate counter on target permanent. For 5, sacrifice Oblivion Stone. Destroy each non-land permanent without a fate counter on it. Then remove all fate counters from all permanents. Then we have another Blasphemous Act. It's a bit of a staple in red now. 9 mana, costs 1 less for each creature on the battlefield, so it can, in this deck, it can actually cost 1. They deal 13 damage to each creature. We have a Chain Reaction, 4 mana. It deals X damage to each creature, where X is the number of creatures on the battlefield. We have a Starstorm, deal X damage to each creature, and you can also choose to cycle it, and then draw a card. Rolling Earthquake, X and red. It deals X damage to each creature without horsemanship and each player. Usually that's every single creature. Ruination, for 4 mana, destroy all non-basic lands. And we have an All of Dust. And All is Dust. 7 mana, each player sacrifices all colored permanents he or she controls. Right, we have some tutors as well. Goblin Matron to search for Kiki Jiki, or the goblin, thingy, the Siege Gang Commander. Then we have a Planar Bridge, 6 mana. It's a legendary artifact, and if you pay 8, you can search your library for permanents and put it onto the battlefield. And of course, we play Gamble. For 1 mana sorcery, search your library for a card, put it into your hand, discard a card at random, then shuffle your library. Yeah, it's kind of a gamble, but yeah, it's the name of the game. We also have something to stop blue, mainly blue. Your opponents can't search libraries, well, that affects a lot of people. But also, if an opponent would begin an extra turn, that player skips that turn instead. Now, in the play group that we play in, there aren't a lot of people who play with extra turn cards, so that's really not a problem. But players cannot search their decks anymore, and that's pretty good. Right, next up we have a copy card, Sculpting Steel, for 3 mana. As it comes into play, you may choose an artifact in play. If you do, it becomes a copy of that artifact. Then we have a fun little card here, Trading Post, for 4 mana. If you pay 1, you can discard a card, you gain 4 life. Or if you pay 1, you pay 1 life. Put a 0/1 white goat creature token onto the battlefield. Or for 1 and sacrifice a creature. Return target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. Or for 1, sacrifice an artifact. Draw a card. You can basically use everything. Now for a real fun card to mess up the whole board state. Warp World. It's 8 mana. It's a lot of mana, but it's such a great card. Each player shuffles all permanents he or she owns into his or her library, then reveals that many cards from the top of his or her library. Each player puts all artifact, creature and land cards revealed this way into play, then puts all enchantment cards revealed this way into play, then puts the rest onto the bottom of his or her library in any order. Wow. Don't tell me you don't love that. It's great. Now then, we have a Mind's Eye to draw some cards. If an opponent draws a card, you may pay 1. If you do, draw a card. We have Memory Jar, static enchantments, artifact that does really nothing, 5 mana, but if you sacrifice it, each player sets aside their hand, draws 7 cards, and at the end of turn discards that hand and picks their old hand up again. Oh. Commune with Lava. You can pay X and 2 red, exile the top X cards of your library until end of turn, your next turn. You may play those cards. Forge the Soul. It's a Miracle 2, and it's a Wheel of Fortune. And we have 5 mana if you want to hardcast it. Yeah, I didn't put Wheel of Fortune in it because at the time I built this deck, I also built a Nekosar deck, and that really required the Wheel of Fortune. So we made some cuts, and the creator of this deck decided that the other deck needed it more. So we replace it with another card. And we have a Skull Clamp. Yeah, for all those tokens in play, you can just equip it, sacrifice it, then draw 2 cards. Great. Then we have some mana stuff. We start off with the Grinning Ignis. It's a creature for 3, 2/2. But if you pay 1 red and you return it to your owner's hand, you can add 3 mana to your mana pool. Then we have a Springleaf Drum for 1 mana. Tap an untapped creature you control. Add 1 mana of any mana to your mana pool. Extraplanar Lands for 3 mana. Imprint. When Extraplanar Lands comes into play, you may remove target land you control from the game. Whenever a land with the same name as the imprinted card is tapped for mana, its controller adds 1 mana to his or her mana pool of any type that land produces. Honor-Worn Shaku. Tap for 1 and tap an untap legendary permanent. Untap Honor-Worn Shaku. Now you can use this with Norin because you really don't use it for anything else. Caged Sun is as it enters the battlefield, choose a color. Creatures of the chosen color get +1/+1, and when an ability adds 1 or more mana of the chosen color to your mana pool, add 1 additional mana of that color to your mana pool. Thran Dynamo, 4 mana, taps for 3. Of course, we have a Sol Ring. It's 1 mana, tap, and you get 2 mana. Pretty basic. We have Mana Crypt, 0 mana. At the beginning of your upkeep, flip a coin. If you lose the flip, Mana Crypt deals 3 damage to you, and it taps for 2. We have a Mind Stone, 2 mana, taps for 1, or for 1 and sack, draw a card. And we have a Gauntlet of Power. 5 mana, comes into play, choose a color. Creatures of the chosen color get +1/+1. Whenever a basic land is tapped, 4 mana of the chosen color, its controller adds 1 mana of that color to his or her mana pool. Now to the lands. First of all, let's start with the basic lands. Of course, we play mountains. A lot of mountains. Let me count those out for you guys. There are 23 mountains in here. 23 mountains. And with all those mountains, obviously we're going to play Valakut, the Molten Pinnacle. Comes to play tapped, and whenever a mountain enters the battlefield under your control, if you control at least 5 other mountains, you may have Valakut, the Molten Pinnacle, deal 3 damage to target creature or player. Of course, it taps for red. Then we have another great red producer. We have Nykthos, the Shrine to Nyx. Taps for a colorless, or if you pay 2 and you choose a color, red in this case, add to your mana pool an amount of mana to your of the mana of the color equal to your devotion to that color. Wow. Your devotion to a color is the number of mana symbols of that color in the mana costs of permanents you control. And of course we have some of the basic, non-basic lands that everyone plays in the red deck. Great Furnace is an artifact land that simply taps for red. We have a Smoldering Crater, which is a cycle land, comes to play tapped, but it adds red, or cycle for 2, draw a card. And Forgotten Cave, basically the same as the Smoldering Crater. Also comes into play tapped, tap for red, or cycle to draw a card. And then to fill it up, we have some cards that produce colorless, but they do a bunch of stuff. First, the most basic of these lands. We have a Darksteel Citadel. It's indestructible and it taps for 1. It's an artifact land. And we have a Temple of the False God. Tap for 2. Activate it only if you control 5 or more lands. Now then, we have some other stuff as well. We can have some Recurrence. Haunted Fangraph. Add for 1 colorless or 3 and sacrifice it. Return a creature card at random from your graveyard to your hand. And we have the Buried Ruin. Tap for colorless or 2 colorless, or you pay 2 colorless, sacrifice it, return an artifact from your graveyard to your hand. Then we have another token producer. Tap it for colorless, or if you pay 2, 1 red, 1 colorless, you tap it, put a 0/1 red kobold creature token named Kobolds of Kirkeep into play. And then we have something to search for other stuff. Myriad Landscape comes into play tapped. If you tap it, you can tap it for 1, or you can pay 2, sacrifice it, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards that share a land type, put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. And finally, Inventor's Fair, because we play quite some artifacts. So at the beginning of your artifact, if you control 3 or more artifacts, you gain 1 life. Basically, it's Metalcraft to gain 1 life in your upkeep, right? If you tap it, you gain 1 colorless, and for 4 mana you can sacrifice it, search your library for an artifact, reveal it, put it into your hand, shuffle your library. Activate it only if you control 3 or more artifacts. So that's it. Yeah, the goal of the game is play those enchantments, flip Norin in and out like a scaredy cat, and win the game by dealing it tons of damage. So that's it for this week. Yeah, next week we'll look at another commander deck, Karametra. So see you all guys then. Bye.